Hey everyone, thanks for tuning back in on my channel. I have another, I hope, exciting installment for us today. Today I wanted to discuss a little bit about um, the politics and the church again. I mean, I've been talking about that a lot. Sorry, I forgot to crack this before. My LaCroix, aka my beer substitute. These things are really, really good. Um, But anyways, yeah, I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope we get into some pretty cool stuff. Like I said, my ideas are pretty vague for starting this video, but I did I just wanted to talk about kind of the emerging ideologies, and I've done a few like smaller, shorter videos recently, and a lot of them were related to apologetics uh, and Christianity, and then the last few were related more to politics, and this one I think is also related to politics because it's on my mind a lot lately, and not necessarily to say that I, I've been super wanting to be involved with politics all the time. I just can't get enough of like talking about politics or getting involved with it. That's not it at all. Like I really kind of wish that I could like ignore it and just go about my daily life without having to think about it, which I think a lot of people are doing. And honestly, I kind of envy them a little, because it must be nice, right? To not be worried about anything that's happening right now. But and I also think like worrying is ungodly. We're not supposed to be anxious about things. Um, and maybe that's something that I got to confess. Like this has given me some anxiety because, especially in light of some of my videos, the postmodern Babel, the intellectual decolonization of America, people don't recognize these patterns, and I'm not saying I am because that I'm recognizing them because I'm better or smarter or anything like that. But some people like don't really want to think about these things, and when we talk about them, it's pretty controversial. But I wanted to start out this conversation a little bit by saying like, how did I become more of a conservative, more on the right? Like, did my politics really shift that much, or did the political spectrum just kind of get out of control? Which I kind of think it's the latter because about a year and a half ago, I was still a registered Democrat. I was planning on not voting Democrat because I had become pro life. But I wasn't going to vote for Trump because I really didn't like him. And then, during the riots, during all this coronavirus stuff, like that was those kind of things, and seeing the way those things affected people, and people get swept up in the wave, and excuse me getting swept up in the wave as well, were all contributing factors to me being like, whoa, there's something more going on. There's something behind the scenes that is like manipulating people. And that was when I started. I had come out of Marxism, and that's when I started really investigating Marxism, identity politics. And when I say Marxism, I'm not talking about Marxism like it was in the Soviet Union or in China. I'm talking about cultural Marxism. So basically, when the Marxist revolutions failed and the Marxist regimes failed, this is the problem with Marxism: is it keeps failing. Communism keeps failing, socialism keeps failing in every place it's tried, and then people will say, well, that's because it wasn't implemented correctly. Once we implement it correctly, then it'll be better, right? And that's the simplest way I can put it. But it's just so foolish because people keep buying into that system. And the dangers of Marxism aren't taught at all in schools. The reality of the ideology isn't taught in schools until but what's taught in schools is that it is actually correct. Marxism is a valid theory. So even if they were to teach it like that and put it alongside like, oh, and by the way, it led to hundreds of millions of deaths, but they feel they don't really want to put that part into it. So So anyways, I was learning about cultural Marxism and the way that the thought leaders, the intellectual thought leaders who were Marxists, wanted to implement Marxism into the American mindset. That set off some big red flags, because that was what I noticed was happening with people, that they were, even some people who weren't Marxists per se, or they would never claim to be a Marxist, they were regurgitating Marxist ideas. They were, you know, they were alienating people who believed anything different from them. They were thought policing. They were doing all this behavior that was inherently Marxist. And that was because the Marxism integrated into the culture so well that it became, in a sense, invisible to people. But it was still a very real force that was moving underneath everything. And so I think one of the big catalysts for the Marxist movement was the American Communist Party in the 1960s, with the anti-Vietnam War revolution, the free love, explore your sexuality thing, and so now we're kind of seeing a new age version of that with the all these different movements, and so it's similar to the hippie movement, but now it's like the woke movement, and it's probably the next generation moving forward is going to look back and they're going to be praising this movement just like our generation looks back, and we see the 60s movement as a positive thing in our past. But I don't think we really understand some of the more darker aspects of that movement, which were, and we don't, I think we also don't understand some of the motivations behind the Vietnam War and the Korean War. These wars were against the spread of communism, and basically, what the intellectuals in America were able to do was to trick the population into thinking that these wars were unjust, that they were the colonial oppressors kind of beaten down these innocent communists. So basically, and the media had a great part to play in it. So just like today, the media is manipulating us. The media was manipulating the people then. Anytime the American soldiers would commit a crime, a war crime, or the ARVN troops would commit a war crime, the media would put it all blasted over the media. But what was happening then was the Viet Cong were committing way worse atrocities with more frequency. They were acting way more wickedly. They were burning villages at a higher rate, and the media was literally ignoring it. So they were filtering out information in order to create a narrative, and that narrative went along with what the intellectuals were doing, which was like, hey, these. Sorry, I just heard something. So, hey, these ideas that the communists have are actually pretty good, and then they had, just like we have celebrities now who are kind of upholding the narrative and telling us that these are what we should believe. People who are respected by the American people, just like that is happening now, that was happening then too. So there were famous actors and actresses who would stand up for the Viet Cong and say that they were on the side of good and we were on the side of evil. Well, in reality, the Viet Cong were seriously oppressing the Southern Vietnamese, and they were killing anybody who disagreed with them. And what was happening in Cambodia was also, the killing fields, millions of people being murdered. There was like an intellectual decolonization happening there. They would just shoot intellectuals in the head. Anybody who disagreed, it was just a mass atrocity. And the North Vietnamese were doing the same types of things. And then of course when America pulled out of I believe it was Saigon. I can't remember, but when we finally pulled out of Vietnam, there were hundreds of thousands of deaths of Southern Vietnamese people, because many of them died trying to swim, get on ships and get away from the communists, and they died on ships out in the ocean, and then many others were just murdered when the communists came in. So And we were also fighting China in that war too, because China was the one who was funding the North Vietnamese troops. They were the ones that were giving them all the technology. So we were fighting, in effect, three different countries. We were fighting um, North Vietnam, North Korea, and China. Um, and if you think about it, like South Korea is free, right? Or freer than North Korea. I don't know that much about their history. But if we didn't win that war, Korea would all be under that same ruthless regime. So we had good reason to be fighting that war, and that's really controversial now because people still look back and they're like, why were we in that war? But I think there's always two sides to every story. So when you've been taught to believe like one side of the narrative growing up your entire life, um, there's probably something more to it. And I'm not saying that everything we did in that war was just and right, and that all of America's motivations were pure. But I'll put it this way: my dad was in that war, and when he came back, he threw away his uniform because when he got off the airplane, he was labeled as an evil person, a baby killer. So there was the same kind of just bovine stupidity happening in the hippie movement um, in America at that time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. I wanted to be saying something about that for a while, but even the communists they even claimed like, hey, if we would never have won the war here in Vietnam. The leaders of the army were the ones who say that, who were saying this. We would never have won the war here in Vietnam if we didn't win the war in the streets of New York City. If we didn't win the intellectual war in America. So they recognized that there was a war for the ideology in America. And in America, we lost that war. And we're still experiencing the effects of that. And that is why there's so much chaos in our world today. That's why there's so much division. It's not just kind of emerging just because. It's emerging because it's been planned by Marxists for decades now. It's been integrated into almost everything that we see and know. These themes, these ideas, and so like I said in my other videos, Marxism is the driving force that underlies these different theologies, these different ideologies, like eco-criticism, like the LGBTQ gender advanced gender theory. What else? Critical race theory. These theories are all operating on that oppressed oppressor dichotomy, which is what Marxism is. It's always seeing everything through the lens of you're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. And then as we've talked about, those can become slanted and interchangeable and change virtually whenever. So that's the problem, and that's why we're facing that division today. And so if we think about like the party in power operating with those, because they know how alluring these theories are and these theologies are and how many people believe in them, and many people for good reason believe in these things, they are using that to their own advantage, and they're integrating it with their agenda so that people will be more, their agenda becomes more palatable to people who do believe in helping the environment, who do believe that racism is an evil that needs to be fought, who do believe that women need to be upheld and cherished, and that gay people deserve rights, etc. Right? So people who believe these are having their own beliefs being hijacked and manipulated by the party in power in order to gain more support and control for themselves. And the media does that too. So the media just says, hey, look, we agree with this, and this. They kind of go down all these lines. But they don't really care about the environment. They don't really care about gay rights or about any of these things. All they care about is preserving their power, preserving their control, keeping their viewership. All they care about is making more money, and it's so absurd. I mean, even AOC, she had a secretary or something admit that the the whole ecological face that she's putting on, that she really cares about ecology, is really it has more of an economic restructuring motivation. So that shows what the ecological movement is doing. A lot of it, it's actually looking for an excuse to restructure the economy to be more of like a globalist socialist structure. And they're using all of these platforms in order to bring about a kind of, I know this sounds crazy, but it's happening. We see it with all sorts of things, the Agenda 21, and the push towards, I can never remember the name of this ecological movement. I think it's like the Green Movement or something. But it's a top down control structure. It's basically the government saying we're gonna do this, and it's multiple countries in on it, saying we're gonna do this and we're gonna start controlling people because we need to save the planet, guys. Well, hey, guess what? They don't care about saving the planet. They care about herding us all, like HERD, herding us all into a cage, into cattle guards, and making us all obey and be compliant with them. So, and I do really care about the environment. Every single day I try to preserve things. I try to take good care of and be a steward of the land. But to say that, I agree with everything I do disagree with a lot of that ideology, because a lot of them think that the solution is going to be in eugenics, and that's crazy to me. We know how evil eugenics is, but they don't say that outright. They say population control, or like they'll say, look how big the population's growing. We need to start dwindling it down. Well, how are you going to do that? I mean, people have the right to choose how many kids they're going to have. People have the right to not be sterilized. People have the right to live the way that they want to live. So I don't understand how you're going to actually control the population unless you start coming in and forcing people to do things, and forcing people and taking away their rights. So, and it's honestly, things that are weird to me is that I have to say these things and feel them in the least bit to be controversial. But like talking about the Vietnam War, some people would actually think that is so crazy, that is so absurd, and then they would see me as an oppressor, right? Because they would see me as Richard Nixon or something, because I said some facts that were different than what they had been told and taught to learn. Because basically, you've been taught through your whole life to see the world in one structured way, and you've been also taught alongside that is the more open-minded way to see the world. And everybody else who disagrees with you it's just because they're closed-minded. It's just because they're brainwashed. But guess what? That's brainwashing. Being taught to think one way and reject everything else that is outside of that is brainwashing. And so I know, because I was like subjected to all of this. And now, like, looking back at it, like, I can see where I was in error. But I can also see the truth in all of these things, right? I can see the truth in, like, wanting to have a more just and fair society, and wanting to move forward toward a common goal, and and the truth in, like, wanting to preserve the planet and save the natural environment around us. And obviously all those, like, I'm not saying I want to destroy the planet, right? So that's the thing about conservatism and having some of these more controversial ideas lately, is there's not really any point of moral high ground. And Thomas Sowell discussed this really well in his book, Intellectuals in Society. He pointed out that the intellectuals of that, really over the last few centuries, who have come up with these ideas, have in effect been able to integrate these ideas, many of them having long-lasting negative consequences for society at large, and never having to face up to any of those consequences, never having to own up to it. I mean, you have people like, I think it was Bertrand Russell, who is still lionized among people, but he was a Nazi sympathizer, Nazi sympathizer, right? I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote the book Silent Spring, but she wrote this book called Silent Spring, and it was about basically the death of songbirds because as the result of a pesticide called DDT, I believe. I'm recalling this. So, which ended up like this book had because after she wrote this book, there was an outcry against and a major boycott of all these different pesticides, and then after that, millions. Actually, it might not have been millions, but it was like definitely a ton of people died from malaria because guess what? They weren't allowed to buy pesticides anymore. So these ideas, I'm not saying that she purposefully killed people, but this idea, which was for promoting her own sense of virtuosity, for saying, hey, look at me, I wrote Silent Spring, I really care about these songbirds. Well, you're just promoting your own virtuosity, and that just ended up resulting in the deaths of real flesh and blood people. So, and probably, like, I bet her theory was also pseudoscientific. So I bet there was not really much proof behind it. I don't know. I never read that book. I don't care to. But my point is, like, you get the point. These intellectuals say stuff, and we have them today. They say stuff. Their trade is ideas, and they say things over and over and over again. They beat them into our head ad nauseum, and then when these ideas have negative consequence, like think about Marxism, people still revere Marx. They still think he was a champion of the people. His ideas led to millions and millions of deaths. Like, sorry, I just had a moment there because my moment happened because I'm like, don't you see? But I know people won't see, and people do not understand that ideas result in consequences, and these people are responsible, at least in part, for a lot of the havoc that was reaped for what they thought about, what they espouse, in order to gain popularity, in order to be praised. And so that's happening, and that's kind of reproducing into this next generation where people, I mean, there's no moral high ground for a conservative to come out and criticize certain aspects of the eco-critical theory or the gender theory or the critical race theory. There's no real like yay me moment because basically if you criticize any one of those, you're labeled as somebody who wants to destroy the planet, somebody who wants to take away women's rights or take away gay rights, or somebody who wants to, even if you're not wanting to do either of those things, obviously, and somebody who is a racist, right? Because you recognize the danger in critical race theory, which, again, just sees everybody through the lens of oppressed oppressor. It's actually a very narrow way of looking at the world. Marx's way of looking at the world was very narrow and, I believe, simplistic. He didn't understand truth. He was a devil worshiper. He was a racist. He didn't know how to take a bath. He couldn't take care of his children. He lived on an allowance. You know, and from that evil, wicked, demonic mentality came one of the most toxic theories in the world. And so I just did a poll on my Instagram about what is more dangerous, Marxism or Christianity. And most people were saying Marxism, but some people were saying Christianity. And I actually had to delete the poll before, like, and not let it go through its whole time because it hurt me so much. Like, it hurt me just to think that people consider following Jesus, who laid down his life for his enemies, to be more of a dangerous philosophy than Marxism, which resulted in the deaths of millions and millions and millions of people, and it's still resulting in deaths today. So, especially if you consider like the entire abortion movement to be a result of third wave feminism, which is also, guess what, rooted in Marxist oppressor mentality and that theory. So, and now these things are in the church, right? These things are pervading the church. These ideas are some of the things that are running the church. So it's not like in Nazi Germany when you had Hitler say, hey, you have to integrate Nazism into the church. It's not even like that. We didn't have any top down things happening. We have the church saying, no, we want those. Like, and I think they're sneakier in that way. They're sneakier, they're more pervasive, and I think as Christians we ought to recognize that and reject this agenda, especially as we see it manifest around us. You know, when we see a second round of mask mandates that are, you know, forcing people to muzzle themselves to hide their faces, when we're seeing businesses and states starting to force vaccinations, and I'm not saying I'm anti-vaxxer, but like to force them on people to say, hey, you have to get the vaccine. I think it was Governor Cuomo, who we love so much, saying that they need to start like actually hauling people into cars and driving them to get a vaccine, people who don't want to get them. And I mean, rhetoric like that is just insanity to me. And so I think for the people who agree with me on most of this stuff, like, I just wanted to say, you know, you're not crazy. The world is going crazy. You're right. If you're recognizing danger, you're right. You're not crazy. So good for you for recognizing that. And the problem is that a lot of non-Christians are recognizing it before Christians are. A lot of Christians are so asleep. A lot of Christians are saying, no, I really think like the Democratic Party is the party for the people. They're the ones that are really trying to help us out. Even as all this stuff is manifesting around them every single day. Anyways, I know this video is a little bit heated, but as you know about my videos, I don't I post them all. I post every video I do, no warm up. But I wanted to start with this one being vague and talking about politics and stuff, and kind of like see where it went from there. But you know, I think we did cover a lot of ground. We talked about the Vietnam War and the way people see that, and kind of that was when the Marxist revolution started taking over America, and then started moving into all sorts of different areas. With these and starting these different movements, and bringing them to their various degrees of radicalization. And now we are as a country at the height of all these radical ideas, and we're seeing them bubble up to the top, and we're seeing them turn people into oppressors. Oh, here's the oppressors. Go get them. And then everybody runs and attacks them. And then, oh, there's more oppressors over there. Go get them. And then everybody goes and runs and attacks them. And it's just like demonic. It's just absurd. It's crazy. And you know, I will not stand for it. That leads me to another thing I just wanted to touch on. I talked about masks in a couple videos, and my mom and I are about to go fly out to Vermont, one of the most radicalized states with this stuff, one of the most Marxist states, to visit our family. And we have to wear a mask on the plane. Delta forces all of their customers to comply with a mask mandate, so they're falling right into this fascist thing. But my mom is on hospice, and it might be the last time that she's able to visit all of her family. So, you know what? I'm going to wear a mask on that plane because I need my mom to go see her family. I do need her to. But if I was flying by myself, I don't think I would. I really don't, because I would rather lose $800 or whatever it costs on that flight than be compliant with this Marxist, this fascist party that wants to control people, that wants to keep people in fear, that wants to make everything below this illegal, that wants to make people just into like cattle. And you are not, if you're watching this and you disagree with me, you are not, just to be cold like this, CULLED, not cold like burr, but you are not to be herded around like this, to be treated like an animal by the party in power, but that's what they think you are. They think that you are incapable of thinking for yourself. They think that you don't have any business thinking anything outside the bounds of what's been sanctioned by the state. They think that you are an idiot. And as long as you can be considered to be virtuous, as long as you agree with everything that they say. So, anyways, I'm going to cut it off here, but I hope this video was helpful for somebody. And I just let me add something else to my Christian brothers and sisters out there who disagree with me, and think that what I'm doing is not loving. Let me ask you, like, if you had a son or a daughter who was getting into drugs, and they really liked the way the drugs make them feel, like, oh, they make me feel so good, and then you went up to them and you said, hey, stop doing that cocaine or stop doing that marijuana, and they were like, you're not loving me because this is what I want to do. You're not accepting me. You're not loving me, but you are acting lovingly because you're showing them discipline, right? I'm not saying it's my job to discipline people, but like, what I'm saying is okay, you don't recognize anything that's going on here? You still think that the biggest danger is Donald Trump's not revealing his tax returns? You still think that the biggest danger is the GOP and Christians who don't disagree with you? So I think a lot of things that are happening for us in the church is that we are getting swept up in this wave of passion and emotion of the left, which is really baseless and ignorant, a lot of it, and we're getting swept up in it, and we're also, there's a lot of intimidation coming into the church. We're being socially intimidated to agree with this stuff, and we also recognize the fear of man, where the gospel is hard for people to hear. It's a light going into the darkness and telling the truth. And so we want to make the gospel just like kind of look a little more like the world, so the world can like accept the gospel. So you have a church here, and then you have the world over here. And so basically what we want to do is we just want to like hammer the church down until it is at the same level as everything else. And then maybe by chance somebody who's walking, they won't actually even see the church, and they'll just stumble and trip over into it. So, that there's problems with thinking in that way. And so people who think that, Sam, you're not being loving, you're talking too much about politics, you're supposed to just like be nice to everybody all the time. Well, hey, I'm telling you, that's not true. Like, we're supposed to tell the truth. We're supposed to know what's going on in the world. And just turning a blind eye to it, I think is sinful. And saying, and especially if we're integrating Marxism into our theology, that is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. And if you think that Marxism is compatible with Christianity, I really want to hear why you think that, and make a case for it. Make a case for why you think the church should be supporting forcing their congregants to wear masks, or shutting its doors. I want to hear why you think the government is actually looking out for our best interest right now. They're not. They're tyrants. They're tyrants. And I'll tell you, like, people on the outside are recognizing it. People outside of the church are recognizing it. And I wonder, like, when they recognize that and they see the church that are integrating this ideology that they've seen is actually really dangerous and harmful, what they think about the churches that are doing that. Like, that probably looks way worse than a church that's actually being salt and light. So, and there is no such thing as neutrality. Neutrality is an illusion. Just like there's no such thing as neutrality before God. There's no such thing as, you can be a centrist, like, and have centrist ideals, and even have like liberal ideals. But with this, what I'm talking about is something different. What I'm talking about is the attack and demonization of anybody that disagrees with you. And I don't understand how we can support that as a church. So I really want to hear how. I want to hear how. And so I don't think there's any neutrality on these grounds. No matter where you stand, you're going to alienate somebody. You're gonna alienate, like, if you're a church and you want to force people to wear masks or close your doors to people, you're gonna still alienate people who don't agree with that. If you say that you're gonna want to open up your doors and let everybody not wear masks, you're gonna alienate people that think that everybody should wear masks. Like, there's no way to do an in between on that. So, like, I think that we need to figure out what kind of Christians we want to be, what kind of church we want to be, and go from there. So, anyways, yeah, this is probably really controversial to everybody, what I'm saying, but, like, I'm just being me, you know. I'm not coming on these videos like wanting to make people upset or make people mad. And I'm surprised that these things do make people mad. I'm surprised that that talking about critical race theory and advanced gender theory and integrating LGBTQ doctrine into the church is in the least bit controversial among Christians. But I know that progressive Christianity is a huge movement. And I know that progressive Christianity is wrong. Like, there's no way to make it line up with doctrine. It's eisegesis. It's reading your own wants and desires into the text. It's not letting the text speak for itself. Yeah, so this stuff is dangerous, guys, and I just see so much online on social media of people, like, posting about the food, what they're having for dinner. People posting about, like, a cat video, and it's like, don't you understand that if we don't stand up for the faith today, we're not going to have a faith to stand up for in the next 5 or 10 years, at least not legally. We're going to be forced to go underground as a church. I mean, the left hates Christianity. Like, I'm not saying everybody on the left hates Christianity. There's many who really respect Christianity. But I'm saying, like, where the radical left is going is, like, like the church burning in Canada. That's like a picture of how much people hate Christianity right now. And if we're conforming to that pattern of the world, that is so scary to me. I mean, how is this controversial? I really want to know. Tell me how talking about this stuff is controversial. All right. Anyways, I'm going to cut it off here. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.